Turmoil in Bangladesh amid the targeted attacks on Hindus. Hindu homes and temples across the nation have been attacked, including those of Ahmadiyya Muslims as well as other minorities. This comes even as Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus has taken over as the head of the interim government. He has said that he will protect the constitution and will perform his duties sincerely. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has congratulated the Nobel laureate Dr. Yunus and reiterated the need for safety for Hindus and other minorities to establish a degree and a semblance of normalcy, if you will, in Bangladesh. But there are concerns which are rife. Remember, there have been attacks on more than 24 districts across the country. It is not just Hindus. Buddhists have been targeted. Christians have been targeted. Even things that are associated remotely with India, like cultural centers formed by the government of India, have been attacked. The question is, will this new government be able to provide an all-encompassing umbrella of security, not just to the majority who live there, but also to minorities who may be vulnerable? Because it's not just the Indian government. Even Indian origin congressmen and women in the United States have voiced concerns. Let's try and get a U.S. view on this crisis. I'm now joined by U.S. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, who, among other Indian congressmen, have expressed their concerns about the ongoing situation in Bangladesh, particularly in reference to the treatment of its minorities, particularly Hindu minorities. Thank you very much, Mr. Krishnamurthy, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. First things first, I want your thoughts on what has been pretty momentous events in Bangladesh in the last week. The fact that here was a prime minister who's been ruling uninterrupted for the last 15 years. She's been ousted from power. Muhammad Yunus, who is a very well-known, well-renowned Nobel laureate, he's now been appointed as interim prime minister. We don't know what the next dispensation is going to look like, but the events of the last week, how would you characterize them?
Well, I think that we welcome Muhammad Yunus as the new prime minister. He actually spent a lot of time in Chicago, which is where I'm zooming with you from right now. And we welcome his rule, but we have to make sure that in his rule that he looks out for all minorities, whether they are Hindus or others. And I'm sure that the US, Europe, Japan, and others will also aid him in his efforts to restore stability within Bangladesh.
You have tweeted about this just in the last couple of days or so about the need to protect minorities, particularly Hindu minorities. Could you elaborate on what your concerns are regarding what is it that you want to see more from the interim government in Bangladesh?
Well, we want to see Muhammad Yunus continue to do everything in his power to prevent the targeting of Hindus and others who've unfortunately suffered indiscriminate violence in the last 48, 72 hours. He has said the right things. Now we need him to back up his words with actions.
How much of this violence that we've seen do you believe is against a certain set of people because of their religion, because of their faith, or is it intrinsically linked to political factors?
Well, unfortunately, what we've seen is that there's been a deliberate targeting of Hindus. Whether that has something to do with potential political allegiances, I don't know. But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, no minority should be targeted, and certainly nobody should be ever targeted based on their religion. And unfortunately, there's been a history. This is not the first time that Hindus have been targeted in Bangladesh. And so we have to make sure that even as Muhammad Yunus ushers in a new day in terms of the governance of Bangladesh, he also makes it very clear that nobody, including Hindus, should be targeted, and that he takes steps to ensure that what he says actually becomes reality.
You did say that Hindus have been targeted in the past as well, even when Sheikh Hasina was ruling Bangladesh. Why do you think the attacks in the last week are different qualitatively from what happened in the past? And why does that concern you more than what we've seen in the past?
Well, I was concerned about what happened in the past as well. And I think that what we're seeing right now, unfortunately, is just a new chapter in an ongoing saga of kind of the targeting of Hindus. In the past, during Durga Puja, in the fall, Hindus were routinely targeted. Now, thanks to the authorities in the last couple of years, Hindus were less targeted, and me and other members of Congress asked the Bangladeshi government to do everything in their power to protect Hindus, and I think that had some effect. But now going forward, the current authorities have to do everything in their power to protect Hindus now. They know how to do this. They need to step in and do it.
I do want to ask you, the fear is that now that Sheikh Hasina is out of the picture and the Awami League, the ruling party for the last 15 years, is out of the picture, there is a growing fear, whether it's the Bangladesh Nationalist Party under Khaleda Zia or whether it's the Jamaat-e-Islami, that some of the more radical Islamist forces will sort of come to the fore much more. And that would consequently mean more attacks on minorities. How worried are you about that?
I'm very concerned. But at the same time, we have to allow the democratic process to unfold in Bangladesh. We have great respect and admiration for Muhammad Yunus, who, as you know, is a Nobel laureate and commands great moral authority within Bangladesh and worldwide. And so he needs to set up a process whereby, the democratic forces within Bangladesh are allowed to work their way. However, if Bangladesh is to receive support in its bid to restore economic stability within the country, and if it's to receive support from places like the United States, then it's going to need to make sure that minorities are protected. Hindus make up about 8 to 10% of the population, so it's a sizable minority, and they, like everyone else in Bangladesh, need to see law and order and stability.
I do want to ask you what about Sheikh Hasina. Of course, she ruled the roost, as it were, for the last decade and a half. She was an extremely unpopular figure, but at the same time, she's now in India. She's a friend of India. How do you see her own sort of future? Would you rather her sort of seek asylum in some Western country, or that she go back and face justice in her own country?
Well, with respect, I think that Sheikh Hasina needs to be answerable for whatever she has done under the laws of Bangladesh. That being said, at this time, my main focus is on making sure that Muhammad Yunus is successful in bringing stability and that Hindus and other minorities are protected, and that the country as a whole, see a better future, a better tomorrow than yesterday. Bangladesh has tremendous potential. It was growing at a rapid clip economically. It has the potential for being a major economic power. It has 170 million people. However, we have to make sure that even as it grows economically, that everybody fares well under the new regime.
I do want to ask you, Congressman, this whole thing about, there's a lot of people in Bangladesh and otherwise who are saying that here was a ruler who ruled for 15 years. Of course, the United States was not particularly happy with some of her record, whether it is treatment of minorities, treatment of press freedoms, treatment of political opposition, and that this whole thing was orchestrated by, quote unquote, the deep state of the U.S. I want your thoughts on that.
I'm not aware of that. That seems like some kind of conspiracy theory nonsense. I think that at this point, Sheikh Hasina, no longer has the support of the people. And what her military did in opening fire on its own citizenry, killing more than 450 people, is completely unacceptable. I think the Awami League has a lot to answer for this. But all that being said, at this point, we need to rally to the support of Muhammad Yunus, so long as minorities and everybody in Bangladesh are protected and that the rule of law is observed.
I do want to ask you, of course, Mr. Yunus is heading an interim government. At some point, there's going to be a more permanent government that's going to come to the fore in Bangladesh after the elections. The fear is also because the United States pushed Hasina quite hard on freedoms and religious minorities and so on, whatever dispensation comes to the fore next will be far more closer to the Chinese. How would you dispel that fear?
Well, I think that's why we need to be there for Muhammad Yunus. We need to make sure that we can help him to restore some economic stability. Unfortunately, their reserves are down to roughly $19 billion, which is almost nothing for a country of that size. They had to take out a $4.5 billion loan from the IMF. So they are teetering on insolvency. And so in that kind of situation, we in the West, we in all industrialized and developed countries, including India, by the way, can provide an economic lifeline of sorts to help them and to make sure they stay out of the orbit of the Chinese Communist Party, because I think that would be a bad outcome for everyone in the neighborhood.
How do countries like the US or India, for that matter, which have an interest in what's unfolding in Bangladesh, how do you ensure that if the BNP and the Jamaat, and they've been in alliance together in the past, and we've seen their record, if the BNP and the Jamaat were to come back to power or were in a position to form the next government after the next elections are held, how does India, how does the United States safeguard their respective interests? Because the natural instincts of the BNP or the Jamaat are not necessarily aligned with either that of India or that of the United States.
Well, remember, aid and support is not going to arrive in Bangladesh unless and until they observe the conditions of that support. So, for instance, if we are going to provide a lifeline, an economic lifeline, so to speak, to help the current government stave off insolvency and to be able to provide for their people, certain conditions need to be observed, regardless of the government, regardless of the political composition of that government. And I think that we can condition that support in a way that makes sure that the rule of law is observed, that minorities are protected, and that economic stability comes to all parts of the country and to all people of the country.
One final word. How would you speak to this, what some are characterizing here in India as a reluctance by Western countries to give some form of political refuge to Sheikh Hasina? In that sense, they're saying she's here in India, now this is India's problem, we don't want to have to deal with her. How would you speak to that?
I don't know. I don't know which other countries she has sought refuge in, but let's just say for the moment, based on her current record, she has to answer for certain questions about her rule. And I don't know what the future holds for her, but what I know is the biggest issue of the hour, so to speak, is bringing stability to Bangladesh and making sure that all people, including Hindus, are protected there.
We do know that she's moved for some form of permanent stay in the UK. That's not been forthcoming yet. We do know that her son lives in Virginia in the United States. If she were to apply for some kind of long-term stay in the United States, how would you view that?
I don't know. I think it would be problematic. I think that, again, we don't know the full state of her record, whether she did commit crimes in Bangladesh. We don't know if the Bangladeshi government is going to ask for her to return to Bangladesh. We don't know the state of those affairs. All that being said, again, I return to my main point, which is even at the same time that accountability needs to adhere to her reign, her rule in Bangladesh, we need to help Muhammad Yunus right now in bringing order and stability, because that's paramount. That's the most important priority among all others, in my opinion.
All right. Congressman Krishnamurthy, thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.